Welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and we're talking about Ravnica Murders at Karlov Manor still. And in this video, I will be discussing the commanders. And I had considered talking about all the commanders. Once in a while, I'll be really ambitious and talk about every commander from the set, like I've done a couple of times with a couple of different sets, but there's just so many commanders now in every set, like 40 or something, that doing a video on all of them is super arduous. So I'm just doing the ones that I think are going to see the most play. This is mostly the popular commanders that we're going to see. Some of the more interesting ones for sure. You never know anymore. All the time I'm like, oh, that commander's going to be super popular, and it ends up not being very popular at all. And in fact, a video I'll probably be doing next week is talking about commanders from last year that I'm just shocked at how unpopular they are, because I think they're really great build-arounds. And again, not just my personal opinion, I actually think they're really great build-arounds, and I'm super surprised how unpopular they are. Before we get to it, I am wearing my Into the AM shirt. This one's a particularly cool one, I think. I like it a lot. My link for that is in the description if you want to go grab one. Promo code EDHDECK. It does help support the channel, so let's get to it. I'm going to start out with Kellen Inquisitive Prodigy, which is certainly not going to be one of those popular in the format. We could maybe call this an honorable mention. It's one that I wasn't super impressed with originally, and the more I thought about it, and I saw a couple comments as well, I'm like, that actually could be a really interesting build around, and I might go after this one myself. Just having a commander that's an adventure in the command zone is pretty interesting. So 2 green and a blue, human fairy detective, and has the adventure side, tail the suspect, green and a blue, sorcery, investigate, you may play an additional land this turn. So very similar to a Growth Spiral, and I don't love Growth Spiral. I think that's a horribly overrated card in the format, as I have mentioned before, but in the command zone, much better, right? Because of course I can cast this guy on turn 2 very easily, and likely I will have an extra land in my hand. So there, I think it's actually worth it. And then your commander, of course, goes on an adventure, and you can cast it at any time. I think that's pretty handy. But of course, we mostly want to build around the creature side. 3/4 flying vigilance. Whenever Kellen Inquisitive Prodigy attacks, destroy up to 1 target artifact. If you controlled the permanent, you draw a card. Very interesting. So obviously you can destroy your opponent's artifacts very easily, but you can destroy yours and you get a card draw off of it. And there's some really neat things you can do here. Of course, Liquimetal Torque, one of my favorite cards in the format. Now I can turn my opponent's stuff, like that's an auto-include in this deck, right? Because now I can turn my opponent's Elish Norn into an artifact and destroy it with my commander. You can also destroy your own stuff, which is some neat stuff you can do there. And someone had pointed out in the comments, you can have like a Darksteel Citadel. Any indestructible artifact will work very easily, where it just sits in play. And if you just want a card draw off your commander, you just target that. And of course, it's not going to get destroyed, but you will still get the card draw. So it's a really neat commander. It's not going to be popular at all. I mean, especially because it's Simic and there's so many better Simic commanders, but I think it's a neat one for sure, and I might go after it myself. Let's get to the commanders that certainly are going to see play, and Amzu Swarm's Hunger, I think, is the only one I'm talking about from the actual Clue Edition set. I think they came out with somewhat of an actual separate game, a Clue version of Magic, where there's actually a whole bunch of stuff going on that I'm not even going to touch. But of course, the legendary creatures from that box set can actually be used as our commanders. So this is the one that I thought was easily the best. There's actually quite a few that are quite terrible. I'm actually quite surprised how terrible they are, but maybe it's because they were intended to be more for that sort of separate game, right? So Amzu, 3 black and a green insect shaman, 3/3 flying menace. Other insects you control have menace. So we're doing insect tribal. We do have a couple of insect tribal commanders. I think this one's probably the best though. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, you may create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token. Then put a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the greatest mana value among those cards. Do this only once each turn. Oh boy. So having cards leave your graveyard is the easiest thing in the world. There's a million ways to do it. You can, return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. You can reanimate something. You can delve. You can use the collect evidence ability from this set. There's lots and lots of ways to do it. So all I have to do is use a 1 mana spell that returns a creature card from my graveyard to my hand. That's a card leaving my graveyard. That creature is a Razakath, which of course cost 8 mana. And now I'm going to create an insect and put 8 +1/+1 counters on it, because the Razakath, which is the only card that I'm returning to my hand, is the greatest mana value among those cards. That seems absurd. The insect you're making doesn't have flying, okay, but it is going to have menace. So, oh man, again, getting this trigger off your commander. I mean, do this only once each turn. Okay, I'll just put a Tortured Existence in my deck, and then on everyone's turn, I can just pay 1 black mana, swap 2 creatures with each other. If I'm swapping a Razaketh with another giant creature, I can very easily, for 1 black mana, make a giant insect on everyone's turn. This seems really, really good, right? I mean, it's a little boring, maybe. There is more you can do around this, obviously. At the end of the day, you're just making giant insects to throw at your opponents, but man, that you could very easily build a really powerful deck here for sure, and I think this one's going to be pretty popular for that reason. How about Duscan, the Rage Mother? And this is kind of a funny one. Again, as I talk about all the time, we're going to have a commander for every scenario eventually, and this is another sort of very niche thing that they're filling. 2 red, green, and a white bear 5/5. When Duscan, the Rage Mother, enters the battlefield, draw a card for each creature you control with base power and toughness 2/2. So it's just base power and toughness 2/2 tribal, I guess, or whatever you want to refer to it as. When a creature you control with base power and toughness 2/2 attacks, it gets +3/+3 until end of turn. And a lot of people, on the Discord anyway, a couple of my patrons have pointed out you could do bear tribal here very easily because, of course, I mean, a grizzly bear, the whole idea of a bear is a creature with a 2/2. It's a 2/2 creature, right? That's where the term hate bears come from, is a creature that is a 2/2 creature that also has some, thing that it's hating on. So a bear in general is referring to that. That's, I guess there's a lot of flavor involved here with it being a bear, but of course you don't have to use bears at all. You don't have to do any particular tribe other than a 2/2 creature, which, gee, I wonder if we can find a bunch of great 2/2 creatures, right? Obviously, the base power and toughness has to be 2/2. Can't put a bunch of 1/1 creatures in here and do, an anthem effect. But, I mean, come on. 2/2 creatures? How hard is that? Not hard at all. I don't love commanders like this necessarily, but it is kind of fun to go down the rabbit hole and finding all those neat old 2/2 creatures that, maybe giving +3/+3 to them is going to be really neat. Certainly, this is going to be a popular one. And I kind of like that. It's likely, I would imagine, that when I face a Duscan deck, it's going to be different than some other guy who has one, because there's so many 2/2 creatures in the commander format that they're all going to be likely very different, right? Next up, Mirko, Obsessive Theorist, and I think I talked about this one, yes, in a spoiler video I did already. 1 blue and a black Vampire Detective, 1/3 Flying Vigilance. Whenever you surveil, put a +1/+1 counter on Mirko, Obsessive Theorist. And yes, you can do Surveil Tribal here. Obviously, we already have a bunch in the format already, blue and black being the best colors. Is it even at all outside of blue and black? I think it only is in blue and black colors. And of course, there's a ton in this set as well. They really went deep with this set is super focused on the mechanics of this set, right? So Surveil, Disguise, Cloak, Clue tokens, right? I would say those are the big 4. And man, you'd be hard pressed to find a card that is not dealing with one of those mechanics. They really went hard on those 4 mechanics. I guess Collect Evidence being the other one. They did pretty much, like, most of the cards from the set are dealing with that. So if you're in any of those themes, you're going to love this set, obviously. But as I talked about with this commander before, you don't have to do Surveil at all in this deck, because that last ability is what you're going to build around, and you don't need to Surveil for that ability. At the beginning of your end step, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. So, of course, the reason you want to Surveil is because you put stuff in your graveyard and you also make your commander bigger, but there's a lot better ways to put stuff in your graveyard, in my opinion. And there also is a lot better ways to put counters on your commander or make your commander's power bigger. You could just cast a Hatred. Now I just get any creature I want, right? I can mill half my library, throw half my library in the graveyard, or I can just entomb any creature I want, right? There's lots of better ways to do that. And then cast a Hatred or cast some other effect that just makes my commander's power whatever I want, and then get whatever creature I want out of my graveyard on my end step. That seems pretty good. Again, people will look at this and think, oh, it's Surveil Tribal Commander, I guess, but at the same time, it's likely one of the best reanimation commanders I think we have in the format now. Next up, Coust Eyes of the Glade. This one's really interesting. Not sure how popular it's going to be. It is a 3-color commander for only 2 mana, which is pretty interesting. So a Boros hybrid mana and a green. So this is a Naya commander, red, white, and green, right? Dryad Detective 2/2. Whenever a creature you control that was turned face up this turn deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. That is a very interesting ability that obviously is going to be using the cloak mechanic from this set, manifest, morph, any way for turning creatures face up and face down, which again, because of that disguise mechanic, they really went hard on the whole face up, face down thing in this set. So you already got the support that we already have in the format, which I think would easily be enough to build this commander, but anything from this set as well that is making it even easier. But this second ability is super neat. Tap, turn, target face down, attacking creature you control face up. And for me, I think the neatest way to use this ability is to manifest stuff onto the battlefield, however many ways you can figure out to do that. Scroll of Fate obviously being the best one, which of course they reprinted in this set. I can just manifest any permanent onto the battlefield, then attack with it. Of course, it's a 2/2 creature, and then as it's attacking, I can flip it over. And if it's an enchantment, some really powerful enchantment, I can flip it over in the middle of combat. And of course, because it's not a creature, it's going to get removed from combat. I won't have to worry about it dying or anything like that. And now I just have whatever that enchantment is in play. I've cheated it into play and flipped it over. That to me is the neatest thing you can do with this commander. There's probably a lot of neat things you can do with this commander. And it also has a draw a card trigger on it, which of course a few of these commanders do, which of course makes your build around a lot easier as well. All right, Aone, center of the web, 4 black and a green elf detective, 5/4 menace. When Aone, center of the web, enters the battlefield or attacks, you may collect evidence 4. If you do, create 2/1 black and green spider creature tokens with menace and reach. Sacrifice 4 tokens, surveil 2, then draw 2 cards. You gain 2 life. So as I talked about in the video I did, the spoiler video for this guy, there is so much going on this card, which means there's so much to build around. You are doing the collect evidence thing. So we're building around that. We got to put stuff in our graveyard. We can, do a Tormod scenario, which I think Tormod's probably a slam dunk in this deck because, of course, you want to be making tokens. So we're doing that. You also are making spiders, so you can do spider tribal here. You are sacrificing 4 tokens, so any token theme is going to fit here. You can do the parallel lives thing as well. Surveilling, so you're doing that here. Whenever you surveil, then draw 2 cards. So you can do, and I think you probably would want to put some of those when you draw your second card each turn things in here. And you're also gaining life. I'm not sure why they tacked that on there, but now I can throw Well Lost Dreams or any of those effects in here. And in fact, Witch of the Moor is one of the cards I've talked about in the past that for me is an auto include if I'm in a black deck that has a gain life trigger on it, because now I'm going to get that benefited as well. And since I'm putting stuff in my graveyard, it works extra good. There's just so much that can go on in this deck. How popular is this going to be? Again, this is another one I have no idea. I think it's going to be popular. 6 mana is kind of a lot, but this commander is doing so much. And once you get your commander down, you can really immediately start going to town here and doing a whole bunch. I mean, this ability is just sacrifice 4 tokens. It doesn't even require mana, right? So if I have 20 tokens in play, and then I have my commander come down, I can just start going nuts immediately. So seems like a pretty good commander to me. All right, Ansrag, the Quake Mole, another one I talked about in a spoiler video, and one I'm sure that has been getting a ton of buzz. 2 green and a red mole god, 8/4. And again, I will just point out the silliness of creatures nowadays. This is a 4 mana creature that is an 8/4. That is silliness, and no downsides, only upsides. But even if you just had a vanilla 4 mana creature that's an 8/4, again, throughout most of Magic's history, that would be considered ridiculous. Again, I will also point out that this is a god. It is not indestructible, so that means Tyrate Sanctum is an auto-include in this deck. Make sure you put it in there to make your commander indestructible very easily, which even is more the case here, that you're going to want to have an indestructible commander because of what it's doing. Whenever Ansrag the Quake Mole becomes blocked, untap each creature you control after this combat phase. There is an additional combat phase. Wowee. And you can pay 3 red, red, green, green. Ansrag must be blocked each combat this turn if able, which I don't know if you need to do that. Obviously, there are lots of lure effects in the format already that you could be using. Any of the block tribal stuff like Infiltration Lens, any of that. There's lots of that going on already. Again, this is why making your commander indestructible is so important, because now I can essentially do infinite combats. A lot of people have pointed out how easy it is to go infinite combats with this guy. You can cast a fog. Now, why would you want to do that? There are a few reasons. If you cast a fog, obviously you're preventing all combat damage. With a fog and a lure, or that last ability, now you can just make infinite combats. But to what end? Because of course you're not dealing any combat damage. Well, because you untap each creature you control, not just the attacking creatures. Again, as I pointed out in that spoiler video, so any great untapping creatures will just untap infinitely in that scenario. And if you just want to simplify things, you can put any pinger in the deck, right? Any pinger. Let's throw Kamal out there. That's always been a favorite of mine. That's a really great pinger. He's going to untap on all of those infinite combats. And of course, you can just shoot all your opponents to death very easily. So there is probably a lot of infinite scenarios with this guy. We're at a point now where the infinite scenario in Commander is sort of a bit of a turnoff for people, I think. So that actually might make this guy less popular. Hard to say. And again, another one that I'm curious. It certainly will be a popular one in the format. How popular, I'm not sure. All right, let's talk about Marvo Deep Operative. And again, a commander for every scenario. And this is another old school mechanic that we haven't really seen in the game of Magic much recently because it's one that people don't really like. I was never a big fan of, but they decided to make a commander for it. So 3 blue and a black Octopus Rogue, 1/8. When Marvo Deep Operative attacks clash with defending player. And I'm sure there's some people watching this video right now that probably don't even know what that does. So each clashing player reveals the top card of their library, then put that card on the top or bottom. A player wins if their card had the highest mana value. So in order to win a clash, right? And there's lots of cards that have references clash. You know, they're not great. I will bring up Spring Cleaning, although unfortunately can't fit in this deck because it's green. That is actually a decent card because whether you win or not, it's still okay. I mentioned that in a 5 cards video. It's not bad. If you are looking at the top of your deck all the time, right? And that's where a card like that I think is pretty good. It gets a lot better. And this deck, you definitely want to put like a Sensei's Divining Top, right? Because of course, it really depends what's on top of your deck. And once you get, like, let's throw a Draco in this deck. Once we have our Draco on top of our library and our Sensei's Divining Top, we just keep reshuffling, right? Because of course, we don't want to draw it or anything else. So we keep sticking it where it needs to go so that we're always winning the clash, right? We guarantee our way to win the clash. And if we're winning clashes, what's the second ability going to give us? Well, whenever you win a clash, draw a card. That's always good. Then you may cast a spell from your hand with mana value 8 or less without paying its mana cost. Wow. At least they put the 8 or less on there. So you can't cast an Expropriate or a Rise of the Dark Realms. But man, there's obviously a lot of great cards. The Razaketh I just brought up is an 8 mana value or less card that you could cast for free. That's just absurd. And of course, it works with the clash. If I have a Razaketh on top of my library, now I clash with my opponent. Likely I win the clash because 8 is a lot. And then I will draw that card. I'll draw the Razaketh. That's obviously what they're intending here. And then I will cast the Razaketh for free. Pretty great. Any tutor to the top of your library, like a Vampiric Tutor, is going to be amazing here for obvious reasons. You can do some really busted things here. But if you want to make a more janky deck, I will throw out a really, really janky, really awesome card, though, that fits into this deck, Psychic Battle, which, funny enough, I talked about it in a video, and it is a card that is so powerful you could actually build an entire deck around it, in my opinion. It is good enough to do that. 3 blue enchantment. Whenever a player chooses one or more targets, each player reveals the top card of their library. So we're already doing that, right? The player who reveals the card with the highest mana value may change the target or targets. If 2 or more cards are tied for highest, the target of targets remains unchanged. Changing targets this way doesn't trigger abilities of permanents named Psychic Battle. That's a whole lot of words. Essentially what happens here is, as long as, again, I'm already stacking the top of my deck to win the clashes. I'm already in the right colors. The combo essentially that I came up with here is, again, the Sensei's Divining Top Draco scenario, where I just keep that really expensive thing on top of my library so that I always win the Psychic Battle. And when you do, you end up picking the targets for everything. It is an insanely powerful thing to be able to do in a commander game. Every target for anything you get to choose. That is really good in a commander game. And even something like if your opponent wants to equip their equipment to a certain creature, that is an ability that is targeting something, and you're going to be like, nah, let's put it on that creature over there. It still has to be one of their creatures, but you just put it on a different one. It is a really powerful effect, and it is a really neat thing you can do in this deck that actually fits because you're doing it already. So anyone who is going to make this commander, and I mean, even if you are going to make a really powerful version of this commander, it's just one card. You already have the really expensive stuff you want to put on top of your library. You already probably have the Sensei's Divining Top, all of that. Very easy to throw Psychic Battle in there, and it's a really, really powerful card if you're doing it right. All right, Sophia, Dogged Detective, and this one is going to be in another camp of it's going to be popular for a different kind of reason. 1 green, blue, and a white human detective 3/4. When Sophia, Dogged Detective, entered the battlefield, create Tiny, a legendary 2/2 green dog detective creature token with trample. So dogged being a bit of a pun here, of course. Pay 1, sacrifice an artifact token, put a +1/+1 counter on each dog you control. Whenever a dog you control deals combat damage to a player, create a food token, then investigate. So we're creating food and clue tokens and dogs. You're doing a whole lot of token creation here. This is a deck where I would definitely try to find room for a doubling season because, of course, you're doubling all those tokens that you're making because you're making 3 different kinds of tokens, and you're also doing the +1/+1 counter, so you're doubling that. So definitely a deck where you might want to find room for that. Typically for me, Doubling Season is a card that I'm only going to put in a deck that is doing both tokens and +1/+1 counters, or any kind of counter, I guess. And this deck is doing that. This deck is doing a ton. It's doing the dog thing. The meme factor here is here. Anyone who loves dogs might want to grab this. Is this the best dog commander out there? Maybe. You know, there obviously is a lot you can do in here. You have the dog companion thing that I'm sure people are going to love a lot. This is, and it's in banned colors, great colors for doing a whole lot of different things in the commander format, especially what you're doing here. Again, the token theme is probably best in green and white, I would say. Dogs are probably best in green and white as well. You got the blue for the sacrifice artifact and investigate theme, all that. There's just, how are you going to build this deck? Again, it's sort of like Izoni, where there's just so much going on here and so much you could put in. I mean, you got to put dogs in the deck too, right? So how are you going to build this deck? I'm curious to see what people are going to do. It's certainly going to be a popular one. All right, the Pride of Hallclade, 10 and a green, Crocodile, Elf, Turtle, 215. But as I talked about in the spoiler video, whenever you see a commander that costs more than 8 mana now, it is likely, almost guaranteed, to going to have some sort of cost reduction here. So this spell cost X less 2 cast, where X is the total toughness of creatures you control, which that's not hard to do. Even if you just have a Wall of Junk in play, that's a 2 mana creature with a 7 toughness. Your commander is now only going to cost 4 mana, which is almost nothing, right? For a commander that is giving you what it's giving you, which is, I mean, it has Defender, unfortunately, but not much of a drawback because 2 blue until end of turn, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player. Draw cards equal to its toughness and can attack as though it didn't have Defender. And as I pointed out in the spoiler video, I think it's unlikely. I can turn my Wall of Junk into a 1/7 creature, get in for damage, although I will say it could very easily get blocked. Draw 7 cards, sure, you can do that, but you're probably just going to want to use your commander. Are you going to be able to find a bigger butt than your commander's big butt? I doubt it. Charix, I guess? Is Charix bigger than that? Yeah, it's an 017, isn't it? So yeah, you could throw that guy in the deck. I think that's overkill. I don't even think it's necessary. Drawing 15 cards when your commander connects? Yeah, I think that's worth it. You know, you could very easily throw in my commander deals damage equal to its toughness stuff in here. Very easily close out the game. You can very easily throw a Psychosis Crawler in here. So when my commander connects, everyone takes 15 damage. Definitely not hard to close out the game when you're drawing 15 cards a turn. So I think the easiest way, I mean, this lends itself towards the Defender Tribal thing, but no, I actually think it's a Voltron deck. So the way I would build this deck is just give my commander evasion and guarantee I get in for damage every turn. Don't want to put a Lightning Greaves in here, obviously, because then you can't use your commander's ability on self. I would probably put a Training Grounds. In fact, I guaranteed would put a Training Grounds in this deck so that my commander's ability only costs the blue and the blue. Pretty easy to build this deck, I think. And again, just as a Voltron deck, I think is the best option. Although you do need other creatures because you don't want your commander to cost 11, but it's very easy to do that as well. Wood Elves, you know, any creature that's just giving me some other benefit, the ramping or the whatever. Very easy to do. All right, moving on to the new Cranco, Cranco Baron of Tin Street. And this will not be as popular as the OG Cranco, but it will be, I think, maybe more popular than the other one. It's more interesting, I think, and also I do think there is a higher ceiling here. So 2 and a red, Goblin, 3/3 with haste. So we already have haste, and of course it's got the tap ability, which means we can use it right away, which is great. Tap, sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on each goblin you control. So we have to sacrifice an artifact, but of course that's not difficult. And whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay a red. If you do, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. It gains haste until end of turn, so we even get to use it right away. So a couple things to point out here, as I did in the spoiler video, whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, that's anybody. So on your opponent's turn, they're sacking their treasure tokens, which is the most likely scenario. I can pay a red if I have a red open and create a goblin token, right? So I don't have to just be doing that with my stuff or with my commander's ability. Anyone losing an artifact will work. In fact, I can just cast a Vandal Blast, and that's going to make artifacts go to graveyards. And any red mana I have here, like this is definitely a deck where I would throw those rituals in, like a Mana Geyser, right? So I'm going to Mana Geyser. I get 20 mana. I Vandal Blast for 5 mana. I destroy everyone's artifacts. And however many, let's say it's 10 of them going to the graveyard, now I can pay 10 red mana. So I'm still going to have mana left over to create 10 goblin tokens, then sacrifice another artifact of mine and create another goblin token and put a +1/+1 counter on all of them, right? So things get out of hand really, really quick. Obviously, Dockside Extortionist is the way it gets out of hand the quickest because, of course, the treasure tokens I am sacrificing, I can use to pay the red mana. And yes, the goblins can get created before that first ability resolves if you're sacrificing an artifact and then using that second ability. Pretty powerful and, in my opinion, a lot more interesting than the original Cranco, which is kind of just boring in my opinion. There is some really neat things you can do here. All right, let's talk about the new Atrata. Atrata Deadly Fugitive, 1 blue and a black Vampire Assassin, 1/4 with Death Touch. So face down creatures you control have 2 blue and a black, turn this creature face up. If you can't exile it, then you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So you're just turning your face down creatures face up. If you can't is another scenario, but for now, if I can get a face down Blightsteel Colossus, of course, like manifesting it or cloaking it, the ability from this set, now I can just turn it face up for 4 mana rather than paying 12, right? However, whenever an assassin you control deals combat damage to opponent, cloak the top card of that player's library. So now I'm cloaking the top cards of my opponent's library, which means I might want to look at the top cards of my opponent's library. Just keep that in mind. You might want to do the Lantern of Insight thing here because, hey, that guy's got an Expropriate on top of his deck. I'll attack him so that I can get his Expropriate face down. I mean, he doesn't get it, so that's good. But also, now I can use that first ability and pay 2 blue and a black. Turn that creature, it is a creature face down, face up. But of course, because it's not actually a creature, I can't, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to instead exile that Expropriate and cast it without paying its mana cost. So that's how that whole scenario works. That's why that ability is a little confusing, but that's how it works. Essentially, I mean, it is to cheat the manifest costs of things, or possibly even the morph cost of things if you have that Brine Elemental, which I think is a great fit in this deck, because now I can Brine Elemental for only 4 mana instead of 7, but also manifest that Blightsteel Colossus. Again, another deck where Scroll of Fate's going to be great. Manifest those giant creatures, or giant anything, I guess, from my hand, and then flip it over for only 4 mana. So I think this is a really neat commander. A lot of neat things you can do with it. Should be a pretty popular one, I think. Okay, Voja. Jaws of the Conclave, 2 red, white, and a green wolf, 5/5 Vigilance Trample, Ward 3. When Voja, Jaws of the Conclave attacks, put X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of elves you control. Draw a card for each wolf you control. And as I talked about in the spoiler video I did, I thought you would lean more towards wolves. It certainly doesn't hurt to put +1/+1 counters on your creatures, especially your commander, which is already 5/5 Vigilance Trample Ward 3. How I would build this deck is I would lean more towards the wolves because, of course, drawing cards is probably likely a lot better than putting +1/+1 counters on your creatures. It is very easy, though, again, to just throw the Wood Elves in here or the Farhaven Elf because I need ramp anyway. And wouldn't you know it, now I have an elf in play and it's putting counters on all my creatures, which is pretty great. And obviously, you can very easily do the Changeling thing because those are both elves and wolves. So if I have a Taurine Mauler, very easy to throw that in this deck. Now my Taurine Mauler is going to put a counter on all my creatures when my commander attacks, and it's going to draw me a card as well. I will point out though, in order to get anything, your commander has to be attacking. So we do want to make sure we put, I mean, again, the Lightning Greaves or whatever, unless you want to do the Voltron strategy here, which you could, you don't really need to. Your commander is already pretty good and it's getting bigger as you go. So I think a Lightning Greaves is okay here. You want that attack trigger immediately. Any haste enabler is going to work. Rhythm of the Wild, obviously there's lots in these colors. Extra combats as well, you know, Seize the Day or something like that. Because your commander has an attack trigger, very easy to put those in here. Again, this is another commander where the build around seems pretty obvious, but I would say it is likely that we're going to see a lot of these decks that are going to be completely different from each other. All right, moving on to Dely, Streetwise Lookout, 2 and a white, Human Scout 2/2. Creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. So I think this is probably the third or fourth commander from this set that fits into that category of, you know, the commander for every scenario. So now we have a power 2 or less. I mean, we already have a power toughness 2/2 commander. Now we just have strictly power 2 or less commander. Also, infinite ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers. That ability triggers an additional time. So I guess likely this would go in the Duscan deck as well, right? Because of course, all your creatures are going to be power 2 or less. And as a lot of people have pointed out already, this is going to be a popular commander, but also goes in the 99 of a lot of decks, right? I haven't talked about that much. There is a few commanders here that probably will go in the 99 of a lot of decks. This is going to be the one that I think will the most go in the 99 of decks. This is probably going to be the most 99 commander in this set. It's going to go in a lot of decks for sure. There's already a lot of decks out there doing the power 2 or less thing, and this can easily fit into the 99. Maybe this could replace whatever commander you already have. Pretty neat to build around this ability. Again, I will throw out Feral Zealot. You know, if you want to do a little more of a rabbit hole deck where I'm putting all those neat creatures in there. Of course, Feral Zealot is a creature that you don't want to be blocked. So it's going to be easier for your creature to not be blocked. So it fits into the first ability, and it also fits into the second ability because, of course, it has a triggered ability. And it's going to trigger twice, so you'll be able to throw 3 damage around twice. You could kill a 6 toughness creature with that guy. I think that's a great fit in this deck. It's certainly going to be a popular commander in the format, without a doubt. All right, we got another 5-color commander and another Niv Mizzet. I guess they're just going to keep doing this over and over too as well. So Niv Mizzet, Guild Pact, white, blue, black, red, and a green. So a 5-color Niv Mizzet again, and usually when you have a 5-color commander from a set, 5-color is unfortunately the most popular color combination in the entire format, by far, in fact. And usually when you have a 5-color commander from a set, and almost every set now has a 5-color commander, usually it's the most popular, if not it's in like the top 2 or 3. So just for the fact that this is a 5-color commander, I'm guessing it's going to be one of the most popular commanders from this set. So Dragon Avatar 6/6, of course, flying hexproof from multicolored, which is interesting. That's pretty good for sure. I would say the majority of the removal, though, in the format is monocolored, so it shouldn't be that hard to get this off the table if you're this guy's opponent. It is going to protect against a few things, though. So whenever Niv Mizzet Guild Pact deals combat damage to a player, it deals X damage to any target. That's pretty good. Target player draws X cards, also good, and you gain X life. So all just generic good stuff, essentially. Where X is the number of different colored pairs among permanents you control that are exactly 2 colors. So, of course, the question everyone's going to ask immediately, is this better than the other 5-color Niv Mizzet that's doing the 2-color thing? I think, obviously, they go in each other's decks. I mean, the other one definitely goes in this deck because it's going to refill your hand. This one wants permanents in play, though. And how much are you going to be getting, though, in play? 2-color cards, right? You want 2 colors of those different color pairings, just like with the other Niv Mizzet. You want the different colored pairings. How easy is it going to be to make that happen? I mean, if I only have 3, I think that's a very doable scenario for sure to have 3 of those different colored pairings in play. Now, when I deal damage, I mean, people will say, oh, well, how am I going to get all those different? Well, you don't have to. Just having 3 means I can now lightning bolt any target. Target player draws X cards, which is obviously going to be you. I mean, I guess you could give the cards away to someone else, but you get to draw 3 cards and you gain 3 life. That seems pretty good for just getting in for damage with your commander, which has flying and protection from multicolored, so it's really hard to block. So all I have to worry about is just putting permanents into play that are 2 colors. Pretty easy build around, I think, and is certainly going to be a popular commander in the format without a doubt. Getting to what I think my picks are for the top 3 Most popular commanders in the format, that's what I got here, the last three. Vannifar evolved Enigma, 2 green and a blue elf ooze wizard, 3/4. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose one. Cloak a card from your hand or put a +1/+1 counter on each colorless creature you control. And as I talked about in the spoiler video, you could build around that second ability there, putting +1/+1 counters on colorless creatures. The idea here being obviously that you could just, I mean, you could cloak creatures or put morph creatures in play, put counters on them. Okay, I guess that's all right. I had pointed out that you could do a modular deck. This would be a great commander for a modular deck because those are colorless creatures and they want counters on them. That is a neat way to go with this commander, but that first ability is just so much better, cloaking a card from your hand. This is a Scroll of Fate in the command zone, which of course, Scroll of Fate, again, this is the third commander that it's an absolute slam dunk, that card. Good thing they reprinted it. It is very easy for you to play your commander and then immediately on combat on your turn, you cloak some busted card from your hand. Let's call it a Blightsteel Colossus. You cloak it, it's a 2/2 creature. And of course, because it is cloaked and not just manifested, it has the ward 2, which makes it even better in this scenario. And you can turn it face up anytime for its mana cost if it's a creature card. But instead of paying the mana again, we just cheat the flip, which you can easily do with blinking, right? I just need a Conjurer's Closet, and on my end step, I flip it over, and now I have a Blightsteel Colossus that I paid 0 mana for, right? Doesn't even have to be a creature. I can just cheat an Omniscience into play on combat. It's a 2/2 creature with ward 2. And then again, Conjurer's Closet or any blink. I mean, you're in blue. There's tons of ways to blink creatures in blue. And now I have an Omniscience in play. So that is likely the way people are going to build this deck. It's the most powerful way to build the deck. I think it's probably the best way to build the deck too. And I imagine a lot of people are going to be doing it. So for that reason, this commander might be really popular. But again, who knows? Maybe not. Maybe just doing those big, busted, flashy, I cheated Omniscience into play. Those sort of plays, maybe people are bored with, and for that reason, they might not go after this commander. It's hard to say. All right. Massacre Girl, Known Killer is a commander that, again, I'm not sure how much buzz it's getting. But I think eventually it will be one of the most popular mono black commanders in the format, or at least it should be. First of all, it's very interesting. It's very flavorful, and also it's really powerful. I have already played against this commander, and yeah, it is about as good as you would expect. So 2 black human assassin 4/4 with menace. Creatures you control have Wither. Well, that's pretty interesting. You can do the -1/-1 counter theme here, and there is a fair amount of support in mono black that you can do, and I certainly would do that. However, mostly what you're going to be building around is whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, if its toughness has less than 1, draw a card. So you want effects here that are going to be reducing your opponent's creature's toughness, right, to 0 or less. And of course, in black, there's a ton of ways to do that with your commander's ability. First of all, because it's giving your creatures Wither. I mean, any big creature will work here. If I just have a big creature, I attack with it, my opponent's going to want to block. And if it's got Wither, it's going to reduce that creature's toughness to 0, and I get the draw card. So, in that scenario, it almost becomes whenever an opponent blocks, I get the draw card. But an even easier way is with what I would say the majority of black board wipes do, like Toxic Deluge, which is, that's going to do it. That's going to draw you the cards. And again, I will bring up that I played against this deck, and I was playing a black deck. I was playing a blue-black deck. I had a Toxic Deluge in my hand, and Buddy had his Massacre Girl Known Killer out, and I'm like, I don't even want to cast my Toxic Deluge because everyone's creatures, all mine and the other opponents, they're all going to die and have toughness 0, and then he gets to draw a ton of cards, which is exactly what happened. If you get board wiped here, it's like, oh, well, as long as it's the appropriate board wipe, just refill your hand. So it's actually not that big of a downside. And of course, there's lots of board wipes that are good at that. Terror Tide is one I will bring up that just came out in Lost Caverns of Ixalan that I've been using. That's a pretty damn good board wipe as well that will work here. There's a few. Not hard to do this, and you get to constantly be drawing cards, and having a commander that draws cards as easily as this one does makes your deck building process so much easier. This is a great commander, and I think it's going to be a popular one. I think the most popular commander from this set, though, is going to be Judith, Carnage, Connoisseur, 3 black and a red, human shaman, 3/4. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, choose one. That spell gains Death Touch and Lifelink, or create a 2/2 red imp creature token with when this creature dies, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. So there's just so much you can do here. And as I already said in the spoiler video, this might be, I mean, this really is the only dedicated Spellslinger commander, instant and sorcery commander in Rakdos colors, I think. Typically we see that in Izzet colors, but geez, this might already be one of the best Spellslinger commanders out there, even though it's not in Izzet colors, because both of those payoffs are fantastic. And yes, of course, you want damage spells in here as much as you can. Now your Lightning Bolt not only kills any creature, but it also is going to gain you life, which is great. So now again, we can build around the life gain theme if we want to, which I would maybe a little bit. Certainly a Well of Lost Dreams is worth putting in this deck without a doubt. And then any other spell I cast, instant or sorcery, that isn't dealing damage, I just get that 2/2 red imp creature token that when it dies deals 2 damage to each opponent. The commonality here, by the way, the theme that fits both of these, by the way, is the non-combat damage theme, which you are definitely going to want to explore, right? That Chandra's Incinerator absolutely goes in this deck. A lot of those things, any of those non-combat things are going to fit here because, of course, the damage spells that you're shooting at your opponents, if you're shooting them at your opponents, is going to trigger them. And also the red imp that you're creating when it dies is going to trigger stuff like that as well. So that's definitely the common theme there. This is a really powerful commander, and it is very unique as well, right? I talk about all the time what makes commanders really popular in the format, I think, is a commander that has, I would say, not a super easy build around, but a pretty easy build around. It's not super difficult to build. You can go in a few different directions here. It is fairly open-ended, but also it's really, really powerful. And also it is fairly unique. This isn't super unique, but we haven't really seen a Spellslinger commander in Rakdos colors, and we certainly haven't seen one that's doing this. So for all those reasons, this is, I think, likely going to be the most popular commander from this set. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. It's hard to say now. Again, the combination of sort of the different mentality that a lot of commander players have now with the commanders they want to go after, I've been surprised a bunch in recent years. There's a lot of combination going on here with how people decide to go after certain commanders. Certainly a big part of it is we just get so many commanders, that a lot of commanders that I see where I'm like, oh man, that's great build around. That's going to be a really popular one. It's not really at all, because there's just so many commanders and it gets overshadowed very easily. And maybe even the next set that comes out, there's another commander that overshadows that one that just came out that I thought was pretty good. There's a lot of reasons why commanders are not very popular or really, really popular. This is essentially my guess. I think these are going to be the most popular ones from the set. You guys let me know in the comments below what your favorite commanders are from this set, which ones you're going to be going after yourself. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.